Hi, welcome back. Thanks for joining me today. In Matthew chapter 18 and verses 21 to 35, Jesus offers a parable about forgiveness. Jesus was trying to teach Peter and the other disciples the need to forgive those who sin against us, to forgive them fully and completely. As often as forgiveness is sought, we're to be willing to offer it, to give it. That's very challenging. Forgiveness perhaps is among the more challenging of the commands that Jesus gives us. When someone sins against us, that sin is real. The consequence of that sin, the pain is real. It cuts deep. And it's often very, very difficult for us to release someone from the wrong that they have committed against us. Yet Jesus conveys it's absolutely necessary for us as his disciples to be as forgiving as he was. And to make this point, Jesus, as he often would do, he gave a parable. And on this parable, he talks about a servant who was unforgiving. As we go through it, the parable begins by a master bringing this servant before him. This servant owed an insurmountable amount of money to his master, 10,000 talents. And the master began to tell the servant that he demanded repayment, and that if he didn't pay him, he was going to throw his family in prison. His life was going to be ruined, essentially, taken from him. Well, of course, the servant, unable to begin to repay this debt, just began to plead with the master. And over this time here, the master became filled with compassion, and he forgave this servant, released him from this debt fully and completely. That must have been very, very joyous for this servant to be forgiven that kind of debt. However, this servant left, and he went and found one of his servants who owed him money, owed him a very small amount of money, roughly a day's wage, an insignificant amount of money. Yet he went to this servant and violently grabs him by the throat and begins to demand repayment. Well, eventually word of what this servant did got back to the master. The master brought him back and condemned him for his violent treatment of this other servant. The master couldn't understand how this servant, having been forgiven this insurmountable debt, could not extend forgiveness in a much smaller situation to another man. As a result, the servant is condemned. So what can we learn from this parable? Of course, there were times where the parables were confusing and perplexing. This parable seems to be quite obvious in the points that Jesus is trying to convey. So first of all, let's talk about debt. Debt plays an important role in this parable. The point being that we owe an insurmountable debt to God, and that debt is caused by sin. 10,000 talents is what this servant owed his master. Now you can try to figure out how much money that would be worth today. It's an astronomical figure. One talent alone was an enormous sum. The point that Jesus is trying to convey is it's a sum that even if the master would have worked out a payment plan with this man, he wouldn't have been able to repay it. It was impossible. It's impossible for us to repay the debt of our sin. No amount of money, no amount of good works can be performed in order for us to break even with God. It is only God who can forgive us fully and completely. Secondly, we learn that compassion is what motivates forgiveness. The master becomes filled with compassion. Compassion is what is able to cancel the debt of an offense. And as we think about our relationships with other people, eventually in any relationship, people are going to hurt one another. They're going to offend one another. They're going to sin against one another. And the only way that relationship can be repaired is by being motivated with compassion and offering forgiveness. That's what did it in this parable, and that's what will do it for us in our relationships. We must have the same kind of compassion that God has toward us that's been displayed in the form of Jesus, that compassion must be extended to others in order for us to be forgiving. And lastly, we learn that God does not tolerate the unforgiving. He had no tolerance toward this unforgiving servant, and he will have no tolerance toward us if we are unforgiving. The king asked the unforgiving servant why he should not have extended the same compassion which motivated the master to forgive his debt. There's no good explanation for that, of course. God will not forgive those who are unwilling to forgive their fellow man. So we have to forgive. We have to learn how to forgive. This parable teaches us some important aspects of how to forgive. Compassion is vital. The love that has been extended to us, the compassion of God, is supposed to be transformative. When we can understand the compassion displayed through Jesus on the cross, then certainly it should be humbling to us. That if God was willing to extend compassion to that extent, certainly we should be willing to extend it to other people. We all need it. We all need compassion. We all need forgiveness. So I thank you for joining me today. I hope this lesson has been helpful. I know for the sake of time we did not read the parable. Maybe if you have a few minutes here as we bring this video to a close, you can read Matthew 18 and verses 21 to 35 and give more thought to this very important parable relating to this very, very important command of us being willing to forgive when others sin against us. So thanks for joining me. Have a nice day.